alternative talk radio. Get ready, America, for Deadline Live with your host, Jack Blood. Deadline Live is the daily wrap-up for those too busy in the daily grind to discern and dissect the news. While the so-called mainstream media buries the truth, Jack Blood uncovers it, exposing the lies that our trusted government officials do not want us to know. And now, please welcome Jack Blood.
Well, that's right, folks. We can feed all the people in the world without taking everything and every ounce of their freedom in order to do it. There are real solutions to real problems, but instead we keep getting phony solutions to phony problems. It's the very people that provide the solutions to are the very people that create the problems that they've got the solutions for. Yes, it's called the Hegelian dialectic. Welcome. Thank you for joining us. Deadline Live. I'm Jack Blood. This is Oracle Broadcasting and Affiliates. Marc Morano is with us today. He is the editor and publisher of Climate Depot. Marc's been on many times. He is out there, one of the loudest voices to kind of correct the record of so-called science. And without people like him, we'd basically already be being taxed for our breathing and our flatulence and everything else. Marc, I know you're limited on time, so let's just get right to it. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you. Happy to be here. Happy to be back here.
I'm happy you're here, too, and I'm also happy that we're going on a green Sputnik program, according to the usurper-in-chief. I'm sorry. Wasn't that communist Russia that did that?
Yeah, I mean, first of all, this will probably happen in terms of spending, because the one thing that's not controversial in Washington is spending money. Both Republicans and Democrats heartily agree that that's okay to do. And don't be fooled by the GOP Congress, rhetoric, because we maybe get 1 year of fiscal conservatism out of the GOP Congress, and then it's over, just a replay of '94. But what President Obama is trying to do is turn massive investments to technologies which aren't ready yet. And I'm not here to trash wind and solar, although you easily could, particularly wind, which is now one of the greatest follies that Europe has gotten itself in. And we have the UK now with wind energy, part of the green energy strategy that they've invested so much money in. They're actually using up more energy than they're producing because they have to be heated in the winter. So it's just one of the silliest things, not to mention the environmental impact on the ground to install them and the bird, blending up birds left and right. The bottom line is this is one of the greatest boondoggles we could be doing with government money. And China is always held up by President Obama and other global warming believers and environmentalists as the model that we should be following. And China's going to beat us in green energy. Well, my answer is very simple. If China wants to piss away, or urinate, use more polite language, urinate away all their money on green jobs, green technology, let China waste their money. I worked in the Environment and Public Works Committee in the Senate, and we knew that when people came to the government with their hand out for a new technology, it meant that the technology failed on the outside. So we're going to have a bunch of subprime technology and subprime entrepreneurs descending on Washington to try to get this money. And instead of allowing technology to develop on its own merit, we're going to pervert it with the government and government money and grants.
Yeah, well, and that's such a great point, is when it fails in the private sector because somebody can't make money off of it, then it goes to the government where it can be subsidized and carried like a big lead balloon for the next 10 years. I can't ever remember. I can't ever remember a State of the Union speech or any speech by a president in recent memory where they weren't promising to get us off foreign oil and move us into green technologies, yet here we are.
Yes. In fact, President Bush deserves major not kudos, but major razzies for his line years ago that said we're addicted to oil. Well, you know what? We're not addicted to oil. We're addicted to carbon-based energy, which has given us the longest life expectancy, been one of the greatest liberators of mankind in the history of our planet. And what I mean by that is lower infant mortality, modern medicine, modern dentistry, longer life, brought us from a nasty, brutish, short life to our modern way of living. And if that's an addiction, then I say bring on more addiction, because carbon-based energies are simply the most moral and best hope of the 1.6 billion people around the world, mostly of color, who don't have access to running water and electricity. That is the issue. We can't put solar panels on huts made of dung in Africa and act as though we've accomplished anything. We need to get them real carbon-based energy, and we need to do it as fast as possible for humanitarian reasons. And the perverse thing is President Obama has worked to actually prevent coal-fired power plants and infrastructure that would bring badly needed technology and modern ways of life to Africa and the developing world. So it's a really upside-down world in Washington.
Let's not forget here that there is an economic war going on over these resources around the world. So, look, I mean, we do owe it to our future to find, better, I'll say cleaner, why not, forms of energy. I happen to believe,
sure.
I believe that there is a subsidy to the people who pay for all of this. I loved it when Obama was saying, let me just cut in here for a second and digress, he's going to give us high-speed rail. I didn't know he was paying for it out of his pocket, Mark, but that being said, look, I mean, we can move into smarter technologies. We can move into, a point of reference where we as individuals can get off the grid and sell energy back to people who don't have it. These things are all within reach. They're just never going to do it. And in fact, when I hear we're going to cut subsidies from the oil companies because they've been doing wonderfully, I'm looking at Lord Cousin Barry Obama. He's been there for 2 years. He hasn't done anything near this. And even if he were to cut the subsidies to the oil companies, guess who's going to pay for it in the end? We're going to pay one way or another, Mark.
Yeah, not to defend subsidies to oil companies, but here's a simple way to look at this, and I believe the Wall Street Journal had this analysis a couple years ago. For the federal investment in carbon-based energy, the return is whopping. Something like 25 cents per unit, whereas we're talking 25 units per return. When you're talking alternative energy, wind, solar, the returns were down in the fractions of a cent. In other words, the returns weren't there. The money was going into something that's a promise for the future. And again, there's no reason, it's not controversial to spend money. There's no reason to oppose any kind of research in general on alternative energy. But let's not pretend that we can jumpstart this and leapfrog out of carbon-based energy and everyone's going to be living, with solar panels. There's a story about these new electric cars coming out. In the Minnesota brutal cold and snow, these cars the batteries are dying and as fast as you can imagine, and they're going to be leaving people stranded in life-threatening cold and blizzards throughout the country if we actually try to go through mandates to these electric cars, which is what some people want.
Right.
It's really scary stuff. It's just not ready for prime time.
Yeah, people shouldn't die in the cold, especially when there wouldn't be any more cold, and we would all live in a perfect 72-degree temperature if we weren't breathing all the time, as we're constantly...
Right, well, keep in mind, all these blizzards and record cold, it's all consistent with man-made global warming. You know why? Because they predicted and said every possible scenario. This is now akin to the Mayan calendar interpretations or interpretations of Nostradamus. Despite the fact that Al Gore never predicted record cold and blizzards, despite the fact that the major media and major global warming scientists like Michael Oppenheimer all came out and said snowing was a thing of the past, lamenting his poor daughter not having to go sledding like he did when he was a kid. Now they're reversing it and saying, you know what? This is part of what we predicted. We were wrong. Global warming leads to more blizzards and record cold. There's no way to falsify the man-made global warming theory. It is now akin to astrology. This is your daily horoscope where they come out with a bunch of scenarios and you look at it and you say, yeah, you know what, that could have happened. That happened to me. Yeah, that's plausible. That's what they've done. This is no longer science, and they're using this fear, they're using this baseless fear of man-made global warming to get us into jumpstart, as you said, the Sputnik and all this, billions, trillions of dollars
together as one hive mind, and we'll all work like the communist Russians did to put Sputnik up in the air. Bad analogy, bad metaphor, bad example. But then again, I guess that's what the Obama people want to hear. I don't know what they want to hear because he was out there praising, military recruiters going to schools. As far as I know, the Obama base isn't for that. And by the way, neither am I. But that even got Bernie Sanders up clapping. They'll just clap at anything because now they're all one. Because of the Tucson shooting, Marc Morano, we're all one now. And any kind of dissent is basically a form of terrorism.
And by the way, I was contacted by both the Washington Post and the New York Times because I post the email addresses of global warming scientists who have been perpetrating this con job on us for decades. And many of my readers go to them, and some of them aren't polite. And so I was contacted by both papers saying, what do you think about the new civil tone? Are you going to change that? Are you going to not encourage your readers to express their views to these poor scientists who are trying to do it? And my answer to them was, why would one lone nut gunman change anything? If the New York Times and Washington Post and Meet the Press and all these people calling for civility, they would have jailed the founding fathers because every single one of them had rhetoric which they would consider were uncivil. And my point is, there's a time for civility and there's a time for incivility, and I don't think that anyone's rhetoric in Washington had anything to do with a mental case shooting spree, and it's time we stand up. And the most insulting are people like Senator Coburn from Oklahoma, who sits on Meet the Press with Charles Schumer and agrees to sit with him. People like Coburn, who voted for the bailout, people like Coburn who are now supporting more gun control. These are alleged conservatives in Washington who are now turning on the Tea Party movement. And this is something we all have to be concerned with as we look. I just hope your listeners aren't getting caught up in the GOP Congress and actually
what we do, Mark, what we do is we give our listeners and we put people like you on and we tell them the truth so that they can go out and combat this mind control, this mindlessness. But let's have the perfect segue here, because if anything did cause a shooting or any kind of violence, it's generally linked to Al Gore. Perfect case point example, the alleged bin Laden is one of Al Gore's biggest fans. How many people have gone out there shooting because they thought the end of the world was coming and then enter in, and this is at climatedepot.com. We put it up at deadlinelive.info. Noam Chomsky. Now, if this isn't dangerous rhetoric, I don't know what is.
Yes,
I'm not putting it down. This is his free speech. But what did he say? The GOP election victory, the alleged Tea Party victory, amounts to, quote, a death knell for the human species. Now, if you believe that, and you could stop one of these Tea Party people, because we're all going to die if you don't, what does that say about the poisonous or vitriolic rhetoric?
It's funny, and the media doesn't pick up on it. This is Noam Chomsky, the, quote, most brilliant mind, unquote, of the left. And this is a man who everyone looks revered. And if you read what he says, he sounds like a simpleton when it comes to man-made global warming. This is a man who's supposed to be brilliant. I seriously question whether he's given any time to this issue, because he's claiming that a climate bill that Obama's own EPA has admitted not only will it not impact global temperatures, it won't even impact global CO2 levels, is somehow the fact that we're not pursuing this now is a death knell for our species. That somehow UN treaties, which would have no impact on temperatures, even if you buy their crap science, would have some kind of impact. They think we're stupid, and we know that because they're acting stupid when they're trying to convince us. It's the most unbelievable thing. Beyond that, the new eco-hero of the environmental left is Genghis Khan, because he slaughtered 40 million people and he allowed big swaths of the earth to return to forest. He is now their new eco-hero. They're celebrating mass murderers as eco-heroes now. That was my headline yesterday. I'm not making this up. That is uncivil.
That is because, as Bill Gates has reminded us in the equation, that one of these numbers has to go down. People, the stuff people use, the stuff people do. One of those numbers has to go down to 0 in order to confront CO2 and global warming. That's been the aim of this all along, to justify the elimination of mouth breathers. They all say to a man that's the only real solution.
Yes, keep in mind, the New York Times today, Andrew Revkin came out and said that the C word is now, the meaning for climate, is now as taboo as the P word, meaning overpopulation, population concerns. And I wrote back, and it's on my website, and I actually emailed the reporter directly, and I said very simply, there's a reason climate and overpopulation are no longer publicly acceptable to mention, because they become a joke. Overpopulation, the new problem may be underpopulation. Grist magazine, major organs of the environmental left now admit that overpopulation fears were so overblown that there is no issue whatsoever. If anything, we face a population dearth in the coming years. That's what happens to old eco-fairs. They fade away and they become objects of ridicule. And so right now, man-made global warming is simply the butt of jokes. You have people like John McCain, who sponsored the bills, running terrified of global warming and now saying the science is incidental. Lindsey Graham, within a matter of months, flipped himself and reversed himself completely on global warming. So they're running scared. Obama is afraid to mention it, but the scary thing is, even though we've shown global warming to be subprime science, subprime economics, and subprime politics, Obama's EPA could still achieve through bureaucratic fiat what they failed to do in Congress or the ballot box, and we may still have what we exhale from our mouth regulated for the first time in U.S. history. It's a very frightening scenario.
Are carbon credits being traded openly on the world markets, Mark?
Well, that's the good news.
I don't remember voting or being in any debate that said that could go forward, but apparently it is. It's the new gold rush, and it's going forward whether we like it or not, apparently.
Well, yeah, the EPA is going to start a bureaucratic regulation. Now, some of the carbon markets are now collapsing. Things like the Chicago Climate Exchange. Al Gore invested $1 billion in 40 different companies through a firm called Kleiner Perkins. They're now all these carbon markets are going to eventually go belly up because the UN has failed to reach an agreement and the U.S. Congress has failed. Now Canada's bailing out. Japan is talking about bailing out. They're bailing out of these. That's the good news. The bad news is that they can do this through bureaucratic fiat through the Environmental Protection Agency in Washington, and that's what has to be fought right now. And it's very difficult to fight that because even if the GOP Congress passes a law essentially stopping the EPA from regulating CO2, Obama can veto it and go forward. So now we're left with the courts, and the Supreme Court showed itself to be utterly full of scientific rubbish when it allowed this back in 2007 or 2008, and it's the landmark ruling on greenhouse gases.
Right. Well, now the in vogue thing to do is to claim your state sovereignty and get these guys off your back. I don't know how many governors or how many local politicians or legislators have the cojones, the balls to do something like this, and it's going to be a tough battle, but that is really where it's going to have to be waged. Whether or not we can protect ourselves as municipalities and as states, this is still a global phenomenon, toxic. I mean, we just got out of the whole subprime meltdown. Toxic derivatives are being traded as if they are worth something all around the world. And the only way a company can continue its pollution is to set aside a whole forest that you and I will never be able to see or enter into. That's part of Agenda 21, and they get carbon credits for that.
It's more perverse than that. You have carbon trading and carbon offsets. People are essentially, and this is happening now at the UN conference in Cancun, third world dictators are going to be getting millions, billions of dollars from the developed world not to develop their land. So they're going to have more money for corruption, AK-47, palaces. Well, their people are going to be starving and dying and leading nasty, brutish, and short lives with high infant mortality rates because they can't use their natural resources. I talked to a South African activist, a development activist, who said the first world, meaning the Western Europe and the United States, have no business telling Africans what they can develop and how they can develop, that until Washington, D.C., Rotterdam, London, Paris are leveled and returned to swamps, wetland, and forests, there's no business telling Africans that they can't use their natural resources. That's the perversion here. It's a new form of colonialism imposed by white, wealthy environmentalists of the first world on people of color who are at back-breaking existence.
Yeah.
That is the racism involved, that is the immorality involved, and that is why Al Gore and people like Governor Jerry Brown, who actually says the developing world can't develop because the earth couldn't handle it, that is closet racism talk to say someone can't have running water and electricity because the earth can't handle it.
That's right. Well, and then the people that can pay for it and, again, set it aside and manipulate it, they can keep going on business as usual. And meanwhile, we've got people irrigating their fields somewhere in Asia, pedaling a bicycle to earn half a carbon credit a year so they can put food on their family. Noam Chomsky, quote, "If you don't fear it, folks. Carbon dioxide, you're what? A Nazi."
Yes, he compared that to the Nazi regime. I mean, this is their most brilliant mind. If this is their most brilliant mind, we can all sit back and laugh because, he has serious intellectual problems when it comes to man-made global warming.
Marc Morano with us, climatedepot.com. Lord Cousin Barry Obama has said that in the year 2030 or something, we're all going to be in this wonderful, energy-independent, green, beautiful world. Anyone that believes that, I've got a Brooklyn Bridge to sell. I got a bridge in Afghanistan to sell you.
Let me say this. It's very possible we could move eventually off carbon-based energy as we get new technology. But it's not going to be because of President Obama or the U.S. Congress or because of what China's doing. It's going to be because of innovators, entrepreneurs, and because of a demand. They're trying to create a false demand today by ginning up a fake climate crisis that we all must act and get together to do this, and no one's buying it. And I mean by no one, I mean Poland and South Africa, Australia, New Zealand, Canada, England,
Fired up,
Europe.
Marc Morano, ClimateDepot.com. That's where I get a lot of my ClimateGate news. Thank you, Mark. I know you got to run. Thank you for joining us. That was
Thanks a lot. Enjoyed it.
fire on that. We'll be right back, folks.